Israeli forces are now treating a line drawn across Gaza as a de facto territorial boundary. Meanwhile, the armed group at the centre of Gaza's politics says it may be ready to freeze or store its weapons, but only under conditions that remain deeply contested. As international actors push for a fragile peace plan to enter its next, more complicated phase, what is clear is that much remains uncertain. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, appears to be entrenching its presence across Gaza, even under a ceasefire. In a recent announcement, the IDF's Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, described the so-called yellow line, the boundary line drawn during the ceasefire arrangements, as a new defensive border. According to Zamir, Israeli forces intend to remain on those defence lines, transforming a temporary military demarcation into a long-term frontier. That interpretation runs counter to the ceasefire agreement adopted earlier this year under the 20-point plan brokered by Donald Trump and backed by the United Nations Security Council, UNSC. The agreement envisioned eventual withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and demilitarization of the enclave, but gave no clear timeline or concrete mechanisms for enforcing those conditions. Observers now warn that Israel's unwillingness to cede ground and its characterization of Gaza's division as permanent threatens to derail the peace process before it even properly begins. As one commentator put it, Gaza risks being partitioned along the yellow line, with large swathes under Israeli control and the rest under an unsteady truce. Amid this frozen front line, Hamas has signalled cautious willingness to compromise on one of the most divisive issues, its weapons. On the 8th of December 2025, senior Hamas official Bassem Naim told the Associated Press in Doha that the group was ready to discuss freezing or storing its arsenal as part of the ceasefire agreement. He said, "We are open to have a comprehensive approach in order to avoid further escalations or in order to avoid any further clashes or explosions." He added that Hamas retained the right to resist, but was willing to lay down its arms under guarantees tied to broader political outcomes. "We can talk about freezing or storing or laying down, with the Palestinian guarantees not to use it at all during this ceasefire time or truce," he said. Naim suggested this could be part of a long-term truce, possibly 5 to 10 years, providing a window for negotiations toward a Palestinian state. This time has to be used seriously and in a comprehensive way, he added, pointing to the urgency of reaching a political arrangement. Still, he offered few concrete details: how weapons would be stored, who would oversee them, under what guarantees these remain unspecified. On paper, the peace deal, the 20-point plan, lays out a path forward: Israeli withdrawal, Gaza reconstruction, an interim Palestinian technocratic government, an international stabilization force, ISF, and disarmament of Hamas. But reality lurks in the details, or rather in their absence. The key elements remain undefined. Which countries will supply troops for the ISF? Who will wield authority to disarm? When will Israel fully withdraw? How long will it take to rebuild Gaza? And under what safeguards will guarantee Palestinian governance and security? These ambiguities have produced what analysts call a catch-22. As one recent analysis notes, Hamas refuses to disarm while Israeli forces remain in Gaza, and Israel refuses to leave until Hamas disarms. In Doha, at the annual international forum, this impasse has stoked growing frustration. The Premier of Qatar, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, warned that the current pause cannot be considered a full ceasefire. According to him, now we are at the critical moment. A ceasefire cannot be completed unless there is a full withdrawal of the Israeli forces and there is stability back in Gaza. Similarly, other regional officials, including from Egypt and Turkey and various Arab diplomats, expressed concern that delays in stabilization, reconstruction and political reintegration are undermining the ceasefire's legitimacy. On the ground in Gaza, the end of hostilities calm remains fragile. Even though the ceasefire technically took effect in early October 2025, Israeli forces continue to occupy large parts of Gaza and casualties continue to mount. Humanitarian concerns have deepened. Reconstruction remains stalled. The reopening of vital crossings, such as the Egyptian Gaza border at Rafah, is delayed. delivery of aid and free movement remain uncertain. Complicating matters further is the matter of hostages. Under the truce's first phase, most alive captives have been released. But one body remains in Gaza, the remains of an Israeli policeman, Ran Gvili, whose handover is reportedly a precondition for formally launching the second phase. Until that handover is complete, and until a credible plan for stability, reconstruction, governance and security is in place, the future of Gaza remains precarious. The offer by Hamas to freeze or store its weapons, while not a full commitment to disarm, could be a breakthrough if handled with political sensitivity. It may represent the only realistic avenue for bridging the trust gap. Israel needs assurances Hamas cannot readily rearm. Gaza's civilians need security and reconstruction. And neighbouring states require guarantees that renewed violence will not threaten regional stability. But trust cannot be built on goodwill alone. It demands institutions, transparent disarmament, an impartial international stabilization force, a viable Palestinian governing body free from militant control, and a roadmap for reconstruction and refugee return. So far, the roadmap consists mostly of intentions. The 20-point plan remains heavy on ambition, light on detail. Key mechanisms who will lead, command, enforce, rebuild remain unsettled. And the most concrete fact on the ground is a freshly drawn border now becoming institutionalized by military power and political inertia. As the second phase of the ceasefire deal draws near, a few key questions stand out. Will Hamas make good on its offer to freeze or store weapons under verifiable guarantees? Or will the offer remain vague, insufficient to satisfy Israel's demand for full disarmament? Will the international community manage to form an ISF with credible mandate before violence resumes? Which countries will contribute troops and under what rules of engagement? Will Gaza's reconstruction begin in earnest? Will aid reach civilians, and will essential crossings like Rafah reopen reliably? Will Israel begin a phased withdrawal consistent with the ceasefire agreement, or will it maintain control over strategic areas indefinitely, effectively sealing Gaza's division? Finally, and perhaps most importantly, will the final hostage be returned, allowing the second phase to even start? If these questions remain unanswered or are answered only in part, the danger is high. Gaza could end up split between a militarily occupied zone and a politically frozen enclave, unable to rebuild, govern, or move freely. On the other hand, if even a fraction of these promises are implemented, credible stabilization, disarmament, reconstruction, and political transition, the slight shift inaugurated by the freeze or store line might become the turning point that ends years of war. For now, Gaza remains at a crossroads, a yellow line on the map, a tense ceasefire, and a future hanging by fragile trust and fragile agreements.